A bride is found dead inside the most expensive hotel suite in Kuwait City, less than 9 hours after her wedding. Her makeup is still perfect. Her henna has not even dried. But underneath the collar of her wedding gown, hidden by pearls and lace, there are marks on her neck that tell a story no one in that family ever wanted told. The official report will call it a tragic accident. The family will call it fate. Her own mother, standing over her daughter's body in a foreign morgue, will call it something else entirely. Murder. Her name was Sari Wulandari. She was 26 years old. She had left her village in Indonesia 4 years earlier with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to her mother that she would come home successful. Instead, she came home in a casket, and the truth of what happened to her in that honeymoon suite would take years. A grieving mother's refusal to stay silent, and international headlines to even partially come out. Before we get into how she died, you need to understand who she was, who she married, and why a family worth hundreds of millions of dollars decided that her life was worth less than their reputation. If stories like this matter to you, stories about the people wealth and power try to erase, hit subscribe right now. Every subscriber tells us that these stories are worth telling, and it genuinely motivates us to keep digging and keep giving you our best work. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Sari Wulandari grew up in a small farming village just outside Yogyakarta, on the island of Java. Her father worked seasonal construction jobs when they were available, disappearing for weeks at a time to distant building sites and returning with just enough money to cover what the family could not grow or make themselves. Her mother, a woman named Suminah, then in her early 40s, sold vegetables at the local market before sunrise every single day of Sari's childhood, walking nearly 2 miles each way with baskets balanced across a wooden pole. Sari was the oldest of 4 children, and from an early age, she understood that her family's survival depended on her. She woke before dawn to help her mother prepare produce for market, then walked to school, then came home to help care for her younger siblings while her parents worked. She was a sharp student, the kind of girl who teachers remembered years later, the one who stayed after class asking questions long after her classmates had gone home. She wanted to become a doctor. There was never enough money for that. Medical school in Indonesia required fees her family could never realistically save for, even across several lifetimes of market mornings and construction jobs. So she trained instead as a nurse, a path that still let her care for people the way she had always imagined, graduating with honors from a nursing program in Yogyakarta at the age of 21. Her mother kept the graduation photo on the wall of their small home for years afterward, the only framed picture in the house. For 2 years, she worked in a public hospital, earning barely enough to help her mother pay for her younger siblings' school fees. Friends and cousins had already left for the Gulf, working as domestic staff and private caregivers for wealthy families in Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. The money they sent home built houses, paid for weddings. It kept younger siblings in school long enough to finish. In 2020, at 22 years old, Sari made the decision that millions of Indonesian workers make every year. She left home to work abroad, hoping to give her family the life she had always wanted for them. She was placed, through a recruitment agency, as a private nurse for a wealthy household in Kuwait City. Kuwait City, with its glittering waterfront towers and its old souks that still smell of cardamom and dates, became Sari's home for the next several years. She worked long hours caring for an elderly member of a prominent Kuwaiti family, administering medication, monitoring vital signs, and sitting with him through nights when his health worsened. She was good at her job. The family trusted her. She sent almost every dinar she earned back to her mother in Java, keeping only what she needed to survive, sometimes going without new clothes or small comforts so that her siblings could have new school books each term. Like hundreds of thousands of other Indonesian, Filipino, and South Asian workers scattered across the Gulf, Sari lived a life defined by distance from home and near total dependence on the family that employed her. Her passport was held by her employer, a common practice at the time. Her ability to change jobs, leave the country, or even seek independent medical care outside her employer's network depended almost entirely on the goodwill of people she worked for, not on any protection guaranteed to her by law. It was a system millions of migrant workers across the region lived inside every single day, one where a single decision made by an employer could reshape the entire course of a worker's life. Her personal life, however, was harder. During a brief period back home in 2021, she married a fellow Indonesian worker she had known since childhood. The marriage lasted less than a year. He returned to Indonesia. She stayed in Kuwait to keep working. They divorced quietly, and Sari rarely spoke of it again. Then, in 2022, everything changed. As part of a routine visa renewal, all foreign workers in Kuwait are required to undergo a medical screening. Sari's results came back positive for HIV. Under Kuwaiti law at the time, a positive diagnosis could mean immediate deportation, the end of her ability to work anywhere in the Gulf, and the collapse of the income her entire family depended on. Sari was terrified. She had done everything right. She had worked hard, sent money home, hurt no one. And now a diagnosis threatened to take it all away. The family she worked for, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps because losing a trusted nurse was inconvenient, intervened. Their private physician arranged discreet treatment outside the official system. Within months, Sari's viral load had become undetectable, meaning she posed no risk of transmission to anyone and could safely carry a healthy pregnancy in the future. Her secret, for the time being, stayed contained within a small circle. She had no idea that this very secret would eventually cost her everything. While Sari was quietly rebuilding her life in Kuwait City, a man named Fahad Al-Matari was facing a crisis of his own, one built entirely around blood. Fahad was 34 years old, a graduate of a well-regarded business program in London, and the presumed heir to a Kuwaiti family fortune built across real estate, shipping, and investment holdings across the Gulf. He had the private jets, the entourage, and the expectation, drilled into him since childhood, that he would one day take over the family empire. From the outside, Fahad's life looked like an unbroken run of privilege. But inside the family, he had spent his entire adult life being reminded that privilege came with obligation. His father expected results in the boardroom. His grandmother, the family matriarch, expected a specific kind of marriage and a specific kind of heir. Fahad had grown up watching older cousins accept arranged unions without complaint, and he had always assumed his own future would follow the same quiet, predetermined script. What he had not expected was for that script to be rewritten at the last possible moment because of a problem hidden inside his own bloodline. There was, however, a problem generations in the making. For decades, the Al-Matari family had preserved wealth and influence through marriage between cousins, keeping fortune and power tightly contained within the extended bloodline. It was a common practice across many prominent Gulf families of that generation. When Fahad underwent genetic testing ahead of his own expected marriage to a cousin, the results were alarming. Generations of intermarriage had concentrated a serious hereditary risk in the family line. Doctors warned that children born of another such marriage carried a dangerously high probability of severe genetic disease. For a family obsessed with legacy, this was catastrophic. An heir with a debilitating hereditary condition could not run a business empire. Privately, without any public announcement, the family made a decision. Fahad would need to marry outside the family, and ideally outside of Kuwaiti high society altogether, to avoid public scrutiny of why the match had been arranged in the first place. They turned to a network that operates quietly within elite Gulf circles. Discreet matchmakers who specialize in finding solutions for families with problems money alone cannot solve. The matchmaking network began searching for a candidate who fit an extremely specific profile. She needed to be foreign to avoid connecting the marriage to any Kuwaiti social circle. She needed to come from a family whose financial hardship made a large payment impossible to refuse. And she needed to already be divorced, which quietly removed any expectation around virginity that might otherwise complicate the arrangement. Sari Wulandari matched almost perfectly. She was medically trained, calm under pressure, previously married, and supporting a family in rural Java that could never say no to the kind of money being offered. The proposal came through an intermediary connected to the household Sari had worked for. In exchange for $500,000 paid directly to her family, and a $2 million trust established in her name, Sari would marry Fahad Al-Matari and formally convert to Islam ahead of the wedding. To Sari and to her mother back in Java. This sounded almost unbelievable. A life-changing opportunity wrapped in the language of love and new beginnings. Neither of them fully understood that, to the Al-Matari family, This was not a marriage built on affection. It was a genetic transaction, carefully engineered to solve a problem the family never wanted the public to know existed. Sari said yes. Of course she said yes. It meant her mother would never have to sell vegetables before sunrise again. It meant her siblings could finish school without worry. It meant, she believed, a chance at real happiness after years of sacrifice. When she called home to tell Suminah, her mother wept on the phone, not out of sadness, but out of relief so overwhelming it felt almost impossible to process. For a woman who had spent her entire adult life counting coins at a market stall, the idea that her daughter's marriage could erase a lifetime of financial worry felt like an answered prayer. Neither of them stopped to ask why a family as wealthy and connected as the Almateras needed to search halfway across the world, through intermediaries and non-disclosure agreements, to find a bride. She had no way of knowing that the man she was about to marry viewed her not as a partner, but as a solution to a problem he resented having in the first place. The wedding took place in Kuwait City in the spring, and no expense was spared. Nearly 3,000 guests were invited to a ceremony that reportedly cost close to $5 million, complete with imported flowers, a private orchestra, and enough security personnel to guard a head of state. Every guest signed a strict non-disclosure agreement before entering. Photography outside of the family's own hired photographers was forbidden. The entire event was designed for one purpose: to present a flawless public image of a joyful union, regardless of what was actually happening between the two people at its center. Guests who attended later described something unsettling about the couple, even amid all the celebration. There was no warmth between them, no shared glances, no laughter. Fahad performed his role as a beaming groom for photographs, then returned to a flat, distant expression the moment cameras moved elsewhere. Sari smiled through the entire event, dressed in a gown worth more than her family had earned in a decade, appearing every bit the radiant bride to anyone who did not know the truth behind the arrangement. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of food flown in from 3 different continents. A wall of imported white orchids stretched behind the head table, replaced twice during the evening as the desert heat outside caused earlier arrangements to wilt. Children of guests ran between the tables in matching outfits, laughing, entirely unaware of the transaction their parents had come to witness dressed up as a celebration. To the thousands of guests eating, dancing, and celebrating that night, it looked like the wedding of the year. To the 2 people at the center of it was something closer to a business closing. By midnight, the guests had gone home. The cameras were packed away, and Sari Wulandari was alone with her new husband for the first time, in a hotel suite that cost $25,000 a night, about to make a decision that would end her life. Sari had spent weeks deciding how or whether to tell Fahad about her HIV diagnosis. She had been raised to believe that honesty was the foundation of any marriage, no matter how that marriage had come to exist. She also understood medically that her condition posed no real risk to him. Her treatment had worked. She was healthy. She could have children safely. She believed, perhaps naively, that the truth would not change anything between them. She had rehearsed the conversation in her head for weeks, imagining different versions of how it might unfold, always landing on the belief that a man marrying her for practical reasons would still respect the practical, medical truth of her health. She reminded herself, again and again, that she had nothing to be ashamed of. She had survived a diagnosis that once felt like the end of her career and her future, and she had come out the other side of it healthy. On their wedding night, before the marriage was consummated, Sari sat her husband down and told him everything: her previous marriage, her divorce, and finally her diagnosis years earlier, along with the reassurance that she had been successfully treated and posed no danger to him whatsoever. Fahad's reaction was immediate, and it was not the reaction of a man weighing medical facts. According to what later emerged through people close to the family, he became enraged, viewing the disclosure not as an act of honesty, but as a personal humiliation. In his mind, marrying a foreign nurse had already been a compromise forced on him by his own family's genetic failures. Now that same woman was telling him she carried a virus that, if it ever became public knowledge, could damage his reputation and the reputation of his family's name across Kuwaiti business and social circles. The confrontation escalated quickly. Voices were raised behind the closed doors of the honeymoon suite. And at some point that night, in a rage that no medical explanation could ever justify, Fahad Al-Matari wrapped his hands around his wife's throat. Sari Wulandari, 26 years old, a woman who had crossed an ocean to build a better life for her family, died in that room before the sun rose on the first full day of her marriage. Within hours, Fahad was no longer a grieving or panicked man. He was making calls, the first of which went to his family's head of private security, a man whose entire job existed to make problems disappear quietly. By morning, a machine had activated around him. His mother was informed. The family's personal physician was brought in. Their longtime attorney was looped in before anyone outside the family even knew Sari was dead. Together, they built a story. Sari had suffered a sudden psychiatric crisis and taken her own life, a tragic but private matter that required no outside investigation. Medical documentation was altered to support the story. Hotel security footage from the floor of the honeymoon suite was wiped clean. And within a shockingly short window of time, Sari's body was prepared for burial, before her own mother had even been properly notified of what had happened to her daughter. The family's attorney worked quickly to prepare paperwork that framed the death as a private medical matter, closing off any need for a formal police investigation. Diplomatic channels were quietly informed that a foreign national had died of natural causes tied to a psychiatric condition, a version of events that, on paper, required no further inquiry from either government. When Suminah finally arrived in Kuwait City to identify her daughter's body, grief-stricken and disoriented from the journey, she noticed something the psychiatric crisis story could never explain. Bruising around her daughter's neck, consistent with strangulation, not the kind of injury typically associated with the story she was being told. She had spent decades preparing food, tending to her children's scrapes and fevers, and caring for family members through illness. She knew what her own eyes were showing her, even through the fog of grief and jet lag from the long journey from Java. Suminah tried to ask questions. She was met instead with sympathy, condolences, and, before long, a proposed financial settlement in exchange for her signature on a non-disclosure agreement, the same kind of document nearly 3,000 wedding guests had already signed weeks earlier. For a moment, grief and financial desperation nearly won. Suminah nearly signed. Suminah went home to Java with her daughter's belongings and a check she had not yet cashed. For weeks, she said almost nothing to anyone outside her closest family. She sat for long stretches in Sari's old bedroom, going through old letters and photographs her daughter had sent home over the years, each one describing a future that was supposed to arrive, not one that ended in a hotel room she would never see. But she could not shake what she had seen on her daughter's neck, and she could not accept a version of events that asked her to believe her healthy, hopeful daughter had ended her own life on her wedding night. Eventually, Suminah returned the settlement money in full. She reached out to Indonesian journalists. She connected with a human rights attorney who had handled cases involving overseas migrant workers before. Slowly, Sari's story began reaching people outside the small circle that had tried to contain it. The turning point came when Suminah testified in front of the Indonesian Senate, describing in raw, unfiltered detail what she had seen on her daughter's body and what she had been asked to sign away in exchange for silence. Clips of her testimony spread rapidly online, drawing international attention to Sari's death and to the broader vulnerability of migrant workers across the Gulf. For a brief period, it looked like justice might actually follow. Diplomatic pressure grew. Human rights organizations called for a formal investigation into Fahad Al-Matari and his family. But pressure from the other direction grew just as quickly. Reports suggested that officials connected to the Gulf labor market quietly warned that continued pursuit of the case could affect visa arrangements for Indonesian workers across the region, arrangements that millions of families depend on for their income. Faced with that pressure, the Indonesian government's public momentum on the case slowly, quietly faded. In the end, Fahad Al-Matari faced no formal legal consequences for what happened inside that hotel suite. He returned to running his family's business interests across Kuwait and the wider Gulf region. A planned second marriage, arranged in similar fashion to his first, later collapsed once the prospective bride's family learned the full story of what had happened to Sari. The hotel suite where Sari died was quietly closed off and never rented out again. An unspoken acknowledgement, perhaps, of what the walls inside it had witnessed. Suminah never stopped fighting for her daughter's name. She used what remained of the settlement money, along with public donations that followed her testimony, to establish a small scholarship fund for young women in her daughter's home region, girls who dream, as Sari once did, of leaving home to build a better future for the people they love. Sari Wulandari's story became, for many across Indonesia and the wider region, a symbol of something larger than one tragic wedding night. It became a reminder of how easily the lives of migrant workers, the nurses, caregivers, and domestic staff who quietly hold up entire economies, can be treated as disposable the moment they threaten the reputation of the powerful families who employ them. Every year, millions of women leave home across South and Southeast Asia to work in the Gulf, sending money back that keeps entire households afloat. Most of them return home safely, their sacrifices largely invisible to the outside world. But for the ones whose stories end differently, like Sari's, justice often depends less on what actually happened and more on how much economic and diplomatic weight stands between a grieving family and the truth. Suminah's fight proved that a single mother's refusal to stay quiet could still shift a narrative that powerful institutions had already tried to close. She left home at 22 years old with a suitcase and a promise to her mother. She never got the chance to keep it the way she intended. But through her mother's refusal to stay silent, her name did not disappear the way Fahad Al-Matari's family had hoped it would. If this story affected you the way it affected us, please take a moment to subscribe to Exposed True Crime Stories. Every single subscriber helps this channel keep uncovering cases like Sari's, the stories that powerful families spend fortunes trying to bury. Your support genuinely motivates us to keep researching, keep verifying, and keep giving you our absolute best work. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.